Hello there everyone and welcome back. It's been roughly about a week since the What's Next to Focus event took place over in France, and I've been waiting patiently for news regarding Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. And so far, there hasn't been really a whole lot of news just yet there from what I could tell. I've only been seeing one news video regarding it from Chapter Master Valrak, and from what I understand he's going to have another interview coming up in the coming days there that might be more related to multiplayer, but the news that I have read and heard about so far has been strictly towards the single player, at least in vague, brief extent. So this video, more often not, is going to be a little bit more about how the single player is going to be working out and my opinions on where they should go to at least start improving multiplayer to some vague extent. I will, though, put the link to the video of Chapter Master Valrak's discussion about what is going to be coming for Armada 2 in the link below there. So so you will have a chance to see firsthand what his opinions are of the game, because this video is going to be a little bit about his interpretations from what I hear, so it's probably not going to be completely accurate because I may be misinterpreting the information a little bit there, so I'll give the link to at least help give a little more clarification for you. So let's talk about the first big thing that's probably important for Battlefleet Gothic in general there. For one, it seems like for Armada 2 they decided to rework the actual coding for the engine itself there with what they had with Armada 1. So what that ultimately means is that they're going to be enhancing the UI as a result. It should possibly allow for a lot more swifter and much more easier to implement type of balance changes there. So ideally it reduces the risks of bugs and all that. We have had quite a few, at least a handful of crippling bugs, quite significant bugs if nothing else, that have impacted the game currently due to the lack of content patches or balance patches at this point. It also means, from what they said as far as enhancing UI, it seems like there's possibility for a lot more little mechanics there to help with the simplicity for like newer, more casual players to play Armada 2 there. For one of the screenshots, I'm almost convinced they include squadrons, which is something that was in the tabletop version there. I have been taking the past few weeks to actually read up on the original rules there. And squadrons was a pretty important factor, especially for frigates, but for Armada 2 with the rework to the coding, is going to allow, at least how they worded it there, is going to be allow for larger scale battles. At least for the campaign they said it's going to be roughly double the scale, double the size there, and with controlling all units there, micromanaging all that, it's going to be a lot more of a pain. They simplified it to potentially looks like there's, like I said, squadrons are going to be implemented, so you can group up a handful of ships together there. At least that's what the screenshot suggests is there. I'll post it onto the video itself, but if you pay really close attention to how the UI is displaying the fighters, it looks like they're separating the groups of 3 there. There's like 6 ships in the video there, and yes, I'm looking at the actual image now. We are looking at like a Necron fleet there. With what I understand, Chapter Master Valrak mentioned, is actually Necron versus Mechanicus. So on the right there, I'm assuming that's the Necron fleet there. You have it organized in like groups of 3 there. So if I'm understanding how the formations work and the intentions of Tindalos there, it allows you to control all 3 ships at the same time there, at least in these subgroups. And that should, in theory, allow for you to control your fleets a lot more simply. But all I know is this may very well be just for single player because of all the information we have, because it sounds like they're bringing it up to a grand strategy type of scale there as far as the single player, and that has a few little concerns for me, but ultimately I am stoked for this. I am loving the idea of a 4X, like a grand strategy style game there, like Total War Warhammer. So this is right up my alley, but it does open up the possibility that the story, the cinematics, and how linear the story will be for casual players, the single player people, the people who are playing single player at least, it may not be as fleshed out and have an actual ending there. It will just play out kind of like what you expect with most 4X's grand strategies. It'll just play out until you either conquer everything and then maybe get a cinematic with no real development and tension to the storyline. That is my fear with this here, but for me personally, this is almost exactly what I was hoping for. A nice grand scale with 12 factions, some of which are possibly allied or at least working together with each other in a type of grand strategy, that's just going to be pure chaos and destruction. And with it doubling up the scale of these battles there, it's going to be a lot of fun in that regard. But there is no way to know if this is also going to be impacting multiplayer just yet, because the information is very, very limited. But there were still a few words, a few notes about multiplayer in the Valrak video, and all that I really heard about is the fact that they are going to be trying to balance it out so that a level 1 player, an Admiral level 1 player, and they say level 10, but I don't know if they mean Admiral level 10 or actual ship levels in that regard. But they're going to be trying to balance it out a little bit more by having you pick like an Admiral ship, as it were, that's going to have like your key upgrades, and I'm assuming it's a little bit vague, I'm a little bit uncertain about this, but the upgrades you choose for your Admiral ship, or potentially hero ship, with the scale of everything, that it will trickle down to the rest of your fleet there maybe, or at least you're going to have a single ship that's upgrading, the rest are going to be bare bones and pretty simplistic there. And while personally I really did like the idea of persistent leveling there for your fleets, because for a more casual player that actually gives you something to work towards, especially in situations where you feel like you're kind of the underdog more often than not, because even just sheer experience we've seen through my multiplayer videos, that can have a big impact. More often than not, I've been winning my battles against Admiral level 1 fleets, even though I play onto their level, going with light cruisers, not abusing the advantage I would have with strike cruisers or like battleships or anything like that. I try and fight them on their terms, and it just shows the experience level is such a big factor, even when they have like 50% the points over me, because at Admiral level 1, I'm assuming I have an Admiral level 8 fleet here for terms of this argument, that if I fight an Admiral level 1 player, they are supposedly going to have like 330 points with how our Armada 1 currently is. And with me having 250 points, I demonstrate that the experience alone is going to be a huge factor in that. You can just win off that if you have the right fleet for it. And in other cases, I've shown that just the sheer numbers advantage can be also your downside. So it's a little bit hit or miss. I do ultimately like the boost to the points there, but that's not really the issue I truly have with like the more casual players. They're trying to keep their interest and help keep the player base up for Armada, at least in general. My main concern for what needs to change in Armada 2 comes down to this simple question. What happens as the newer, more casual player when you lose a battle? Think about this. It's not just a matter you don't gain the experience you could have, you lose your entire fleet. And what happens with that? You get no experience, you get no levels, you don't get any of that cool stuff with how Armada 1 currently is implemented. So you don't get to upgrade your ships, you don't get to make them more powerful, and you're left with a big repair bill trying to repair these ships as well. So what seems like a very good option, a very good means to keep progression going, to keep things interesting for all players ideally, can very quickly become a burden for those who are not experienced, or those that more than likely are late to the party and don't really have an understanding for how the multiplayer is supposed to work. Although currently in Armada 1 we do have 2v2 that also helps make that a little more easier and encourages more larger scale battles, because if your ally is kind of like running away on you, or already has his fleet destroyed, you kind of can preserve your ships warping out there, because the battle more often than not is already lost at that point. And since you're only fielding like half your ships there, as opposed to like in 1v1 where you have to fill in all the points with your own ships there, that if they are destroyed you're kind of forced to repair them, then that changes dramatically a little bit there. And a lot of why this can be a problem is because like the multiplayer currently is skewed heavily towards cruiser clashes. So with it being basically an all or nothing there as far as destroying the enemy fleet, you don't really have situations where you can preserve your ships, whereas the tabletop version, even with like the campaigns where you can level up your admiral, there were like special events and rules where you can have big campaigns to level up your ships there. It's actually been like that for all the Warhammer type of campaigns, I believe. But currently with the cruiser clash, it's all or nothing pretty much. So you don't get the partial victories, you don't get these hard duration timers that will force the game to end if it does drag out after a certain amount of time. Because if I were to make a rough comparison to how long the tabletop version is in Armada terms, I think it would be about like 6-7 minutes there. Maybe 8 when you consider that the map is and the amount of travel time you have to make to get to your opponents a lot more significant than the tabletop version. So if the timer was set to around that as opposed to 20 minutes, you would have a lot more matches that would result in your fleets, at least portions of your fleet surviving, and that would be a good way to get your experience, mind you, without you feeling like you admit defeat, because that can be disheartening. I try to encourage the use of the navigators, upgrading your navigators to make it easier and not to mention safer for you to warp out without being punished, but let's be fair. I talked about the benefits of leveling up your ships, making them more powerful. Does the navigator make your ships feel more powerful? There is actually a practical use for ranked mode, mind you, I demonstrate that, but let's be serious, that's not what you want for a leveled up ship that you're trying to get more power, more potential out of. So making that a little more convenient, a lot more accessible without having to invest points in. And mind you, you need to be level 4 before you can even max out your navigator to completely negate a lost in warp effect. So it's not like a brand new player can even benefit off that to begin with, damn it. So for that reason, it's kind of why I hate Cruiser Clash as a whole. Not for me personally, I'm just thinking more for the longevity and like the newer player experience, mind you. This is where my opinion more often than not is coming from there. To help encourage your fleets to stay alive there, whether it's like changing the duration, making it more towards like breakthrough, like space station assaults, all that other stuff. All the other type of game modes anyway, because with how easily you can lose in like a convoy or space station assault just because of bad positioning, you still keep your fleet. It may be a horrible loss, but you still keep the majority of your fleet alive there. Assuming you don't commit kamikaze, which still, even with all these recommendations, suggestions I'm making, most players are still probably just going to fly headlong into their opponent and we're back to square one, but I feel like this is at least a good start to trying to help rectify a little bit of that problem there. And while I'm not quite entirely certain what the changes exactly are for multiplayer in Armada 2, I feel like having upgrade options available for all your ships is still a lot more enjoyable for a more casual experience. While balance-wise, it may be a lot better just having like a single ship, assuming that's what was suggested there in the Valrak video. It still would be nice to be able to fine-tune every little portion of your fleet there, especially if the scale is going to be doubled or at least increased for the multiplayer as well. You want to fine-tune and optimize your fleet to the best of your ability, and that's kind of one of the most enjoyable aspects of just playing the tabletop games in general, whether it's like the actual like Warhammer 40k, Battlefleet Gothic, fantasy version. You want to fine-tune your actual army, giving them their own little special upgrades, helping fill those little niches and roles. There is real value to that for like all players there, especially since it allows those it opens up the opportunities, I mean, for like new types of playstyles and different variations. Nonetheless, with that all said, there is still going to be a skew and level difference there, even with my opinions and all that, like having the individual levels still back. It's still not going to help if you're fighting a brand new player, because like after 6 months, a year in, with the sales occasionally going on for like Armada 2, you're still going to have those potentially one-sided fights, at least in terms of the fleets you're fighting up against, and of course the experience of the opponents or the players there. So this would, at least having a single ship with the upgrades and whatever other traits they have in mind, will help in that regard some, but I don't know if it's the real answer there. Like helping keeping a healthy player base and keeping it going strong are probably going to be the big things you can do, because remember, we're playing an asymmetrical type of game here. Eldar, even with the best balance, are always going to feel like they can murder you in like 2-3 salvos. I feel like that should always be the case with Eldar if they're going to be going with that hit and run style. Orcs are going to have ridiculous amount of health pool. They're probably going to have ridiculous type upgrades, not necessarily powerful, but if they're true to their wacky nature, they're going to have some ridiculous type of setup there. If the Space Marines are going to be armored as hell, they're going to be impossible to break, and let's not even think about how much complaint there's going to be for Necrons for multiplayer, maybe just in the campaign in general. Those things are supposed to be deliberately overpowered, and they talked about how they're going to make them a little more balanced. I'm assuming this is all single player talk, which they just simply said they're going to make it more expensive. Well, that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty obvious. Of course they're going to be more expensive. Let's not kid ourselves, but we don't quite know how that's going to play out in multiplayer though. Because if they're just going to be inflating the point sum, then that's a little bit of a shame, a little bit of a disappointment if you ask me. Although I am still happy they'll be able to keep true to the power level of Necrons. Well, I mentioned before in my one video I did talking about Armada 2, how they basically balanced it, to re-clarify, is that for the purposes of scoring at the end of the game, you're just given double the points of what the Necron fleet currently was. They still were the exact same points as you, so they're going to stomp all over you, but based on the objectives, based on the damage you do to their fleet, it basically is doubled for you, and that's basically how they balance it out. Hell, you even get points if you just do 1 point of damage basically to the Necron ships too, so if you could somehow just do 1 point to them, you're just getting a whole bunch of points for the purposes of winning the game, as silly as it sounds. So that helped, I feel like, keep the power level of Necrons in check a little bit, just doing the simplest little things to get those extra points to ensure that victory, even though throughout it all your ships were just getting demurred to hell. It also still begs the question how that's going to play out with Necrons in ranked mode, because orcs kind of suffer a little bit of the opposite problem because of how cheap their fleets can be. Because when you're playing a game of attrition there in the best of 3, where every ship you lose is permanently gone for the rest of the best of 3, it can very easily come down to a game of attrition when you're fighting off against orcs. With Necrons, it's going to be the opposite, which may open up a possibility of them being way too strong in ranked play, just because I'm thinking Armada 1, mind you, but if they had 10 ships there with a possible battleship, they're just going to outlast everything if they play a game of attrition, just because of the sheer power. Even if they only can field like 2-3 ships there, hell, it's like I said, they're going to have the armor for the durability, they're going to be fielding less ships, so if they can just murder enough of their opponent's cruisers and all that, they can just win with their opponent forced to field nothing but frigates at that point, while they still have their 4 light cruisers or at least cruisers available. So that is a little bit of a concern there, but of course that is in Armada 1 sense. It's really hard to give some finite information, like actual anything concrete on how these new factions will work, so I can't really comment too much more. It's just more me thinking out loud, because Necrons are going to be a big deal if Tindalos can be true to how they play out, because they're supposed to be deliberately overpowered, and there's going to be a lot of backlash just because of that. It doesn't matter if they're true to their power level. The more casual players, the players who are not even aware of how Necrons were supposed to be in the tabletop version, are still going to complain. It's still going to cause issues and erosion in the player base, so this is almost a no-win situation a little bit as far as keeping the player base healthy, but with I said earlier about them redoing the code, enhancing the UI, it hopefully allows for them to put more effort into the multiplayer just by making the balance changes a lot more rapid. And you'd be surprised how just changes, even if they're not really big changes, could help restore confidence in the game, at least in people's view of the game, that it is actually being balanced there. But in practice, when you're facing off against them, it's still going to be rough, I'm not going to lie, as far as the dynamic, how everything plays so drastically different. At the end of the day though, this really is just me trying to put my opinion out into the void there, contribute to the discussion that's going on as far as what Armada 2 should be, and hopefully just try and make this game a little bit better, because I am so super excited for this game there. Even the single player for Armada 1 was hands down worth the money I put into it, and I was not expecting at all to put the time I actually did into the multiplayer, so I am really stoked for Armada 2 no matter what form it takes. I just am hopeful that it can do better for the player base. It'll keep everything going. It'll keep matches going at a much more balanced rate, because in all seriousness, the best way to help keep the balance, or at least the matchmaking balance, a little bit better is to just have that number of players available still. So keeping them around longer, making sure they have the confidence, or they see that the game is at least consistently being worked on, will help keep them around, and that will just basically balance itself a little bit for the players, because they'll be more often than not facing off against people of the same rank and skill, or at least the same admiral level and fleet experience. So it has potential to fix itself to a vague extent there. It's just the actual ship mechanics and bugs that will need to be fixed on Tyndalos's end. But as we get closer to the eventual release date of Armada 2, as we get more information, especially about the multiplayer, I am hoping to do more videos like this here, especially start ramping up the content for Armada in general there, because I want it for the life of me to do some instructional videos for Armada 1 about how to play the game, how the mechanics and understanding in general there, but it didn't seem like there was enough players, at least in my opinion anyway. Feel free to disagree with that if you want, but with only like 150, 200 players for a good while, most of which are more casual players playing just single player, mind you, it didn't really feel worth it at the time to do all the videos that I wanted, because hell, just doing the championship series for me of its scale, and that seemed pretty straightforward. It was a little bit different for me, mind you, considering I was doing my commentary after the matches, so it still was a lot more simpler, it seemed like there, whereas it would be a lot more time investment for me to try and do these instructional videos. But with Armada 2 looming in the distance there, the news articles coming out, and information regarding the game there, I am hoping to get a lot more done in preparation for that. So this is just a test of that. It's a little bit of a sample of it, because this is a completely new experience for me here, trying to do this commentary. And if nothing else, I hope this video has at least brought more to the discussion there for Armada 2, and hopefully it helps make the game makes the game better as a result, if nothing else. I thank you all for listening to this, and I'm hoping to bring more as the days go by.